Ever wonder where people found a date before dating apps? Before bars were common hangouts? Imagine a time when being single meant navigating a world designed for families. Where did you eat? Where did you meet new people? How did you build a life when living alone was frowned upon, or just plain expensive? Get ready to explore the hidden worlds where historical singles connected, supported each other, and maybe even found love. Number 10. Your home, away from home, literally. Imagine you are a young person in the mid-1800s. You live in a small farming town, or perhaps a crowded immigrant neighborhood. Suddenly, a city like New York, Chicago, or London calls to you. There are factories humming, offices bustling, and shops glittering with promise. You hear tales of jobs, of opportunities you could never find back home. So you pack your meager belongings, perhaps a single worn suitcase, and you set out. But when you arrive, what then? Where do you live? How do you eat? This is where the boarding house steps in, becoming the indispensable lifeline for millions of historical singles. These places were more than just a room for rent. They were, for many, the closest thing to a family home they would experience for years. They were the practical solution to a massive societal shift. The Industrial Revolution had pulled people from rural areas into rapidly growing cities, creating a huge population of individuals, especially young men and women, who were far from their birth families. According to historian Paul Groth in his book Living Downtown, The History of Residential Hotels in the United States, boarding houses provided a crucial bridge for these migrants, offering a place to land that was both affordable and, crucially, offered a semblance of domesticity, who lived in these bustling houses. Nearly everyone who was single and earning an independent income. You might find the young clerk, fresh from the countryside, meticulously polishing his boots for his first big city job. Across the hall could be a seamstress, her fingers calloused from long hours, dreaming of saving enough to open her own millinery shop. College students, artists, factory workers, even some unmarried professionals like teachers or nurses, all mingled under the same roof. Common thread was simple. They were single. They needed affordable housing, and they needed a social network in a sprawling, anonymous city. The economics were straightforward and appealing. Renting an entire house or even a full apartment was expensive, often prohibitively so, for a single income. Boarding houses offered a room, sometimes a shared room, with another boarder, and often included meals. This room and board model made budgeting simpler and more manageable for those on a tight salary. Imagine not having to worry about grocery shopping, cooking, or the cost of fuel for a stove after a long day of work. The landlady, the woman who ran the house, usually handled all of that. It was a package deal designed for practicality and efficiency. Typical boarding house setup varied, but certain features were common. There was usually a common dining room where meals were served at set times, bringing all the residents together. Parlor, or drawing room, served as a communal living area, often furnished with comfortable chairs, a piano, and perhaps a selection of books or newspapers. This was where boarders could relax, socialize, or entertain approved visitors. The bedrooms themselves were often modest, sometimes sparsely furnished, and privacy was a luxury, especially for those sharing a room. Yet, for many, this was a step up from their previous living conditions, or at least a necessary compromise for city living. Think about a day in the life of a young woman named Elara, who arrived in Boston in the 1880s to work as a typist. Her boarding house, located on a quiet street near her office, became her entire world outside of work. She woke before dawn, sharing a small room with two other young women. They dressed quickly, careful not to disturb each other, and then headed down for breakfast. The dining room would be alive with quiet chatter and the clatter of cutlery. After a hearty meal of oatmeal, eggs, and toast, Alara would join the stream of boarders heading out for their various jobs. When she returned in the evening, tired but eager for company, she would find the house buzzing. Some boarders would be in the parlor, reading or chatting. Others might be in the dining room, lingering after dinner. For Alara, the boarding house wasn't just a place to sleep. It was her community, provided structure, companionship, and a sense of belonging in a city that could otherwise feel overwhelming. She might discuss the day's events with Mrs. Henderson, the landlady, or exchange stories with her fellow typists over a cup of tea in the parlor. This shared existence, the ebb and flow of daily life under one roof, fostered a unique kind of social environment unlike anything we commonly experience today. These were not mere tenants. They were in many ways an impromptu family formed out of necessity and shared experience. They were the beating heart of a city that was rapidly changing, providing a vital social and practical anchor for its single residents. Number 9. The landlady, queen of the roost. If the boarding house was the stage for these countless lives, then the landlady was undoubtedly the star, the director, and often the entire crew. She was the central figure, the one who orchestrated the daily rhythm, managed the complex dynamics of disparate personalities, and ensured the house functioned as a seamless, if sometimes chaotic, unit. Understanding the landlady is key to understanding the boarding house itself, for her character, her rules, and her presence defined the experience for every boarder. Who were these formidable women? Often, they were widows who needed to support themselves and their families after the loss of a husband. In an era where women had limited respectable professional options, running a boarding house was a viable, if demanding, economic strategy. A single woman with some inherited property, or even a woman who simply saw an opportunity to earn an income by converting her own home, might also take on the role. Sometimes, married couples ran boarding houses, but it was almost always the wife who took on the primary responsibility for the day-to-day operations, from cooking and cleaning to managing the boarders and their often complex needs. Historian Wendy Gamber, in her work The Boarding House and the Boarder, notes that running a boarding house was one of the most common occupations for women in 19th-century American cities, highlighting its significance as a form of female enterprise and economic independence. Their motivation was almost always economic survival. With few avenues for women to earn a substantial living, converting a private home into a boarding house allowed them to use their domestic skills, cooking, cleaning, managing a household, to generate income. It was a respectable profession that kept them within the sphere of the home, which was considered appropriate for women at the time. Yet, it was also a demanding one, requiring shrewd business sense, endless patience, and a thick skin. A landlady's duties were exhaustive. She was the chef, planning and preparing 3 meals a day for a fluctuating number of hungry mouths. She was the housekeeper, overseeing the cleaning of numerous rooms and common areas. She was the accountant, collecting rent and managing expenses. And perhaps most critically, she was the social manager. She mediated disputes between boarders, enforced house rules, and often acted as a confidant, a matchmaker, or even a surrogate mother figure. She was the one who kept the peace, ensuring the house maintained a respectable atmosphere suitable for her clientele. Consider Mrs. Gable, a fictional but archetypal landlady in a bustling 1890s Chicago boarding house. She had a sharp mind, a keen eye, and a booming laugh that could fill the entire dining room. Her husband had passed years ago, leaving her with a large house and 2 young children. Taking in boarders was her way of ensuring their survival. Every morning she was up before the sun, overseeing the kitchen staff, making sure coffee was brewing and the smell of bacon filled the air. During the day, she would move through the house like a general, checking on rooms, chatting with boarders who were home during the day, and handling any minor crises, like a leaky faucet or a late rent payment. At dinner, she was the matriarch at the head of the long dining table, directing conversation, making sure everyone had enough to eat, and subtly observing the interactions among her boarders. She knew which young men were sweet, on which young women, which clerks were struggling with their new jobs, and which students needed an extra word of encouragement. She walked a fine line between being a strict disciplinarian, ensuring curfews were met and visitors were respectable, and being a benevolent mother figure, offering advice, comfort, and sometimes even a loan to a struggling boarder. The relationship between the landlady and her boarders was often complex and varied wildly from house to house. Some landladies were known for their warmth and generosity, creating a truly familial atmosphere where boarders felt deeply cared for. Others were notoriously strict, even stingy, maintaining a formal and often tense environment. Boarders would often share stories and gossip about their landladies, comparing notes on their meals, their rules, and their personalities. A good landlady was a prized find, a rare gem in a crowded city. A bad one could make life miserable. For many single individuals living far from home, the landlady filled a crucial void. She provided a sense of stability and belonging. She was the person who knew if you were sick, who noticed if you hadn't come home by dark, who offered a listening ear when loneliness set in. She was the gatekeeper of their temporary home, and often the quiet architect of their early city lives, ensuring that these social hubs for singles operated smoothly and provided a vital service in a rapidly changing world. Her reign, though often unseen by larger society, was absolute within the walls of her boarding house. Number 8. Eating together, living together. Step into the dining room of a boarding house at mealtime, and you're stepping into the true heart of the establishment. This wasn't just a place to refuel. It was a daily ritual, a compulsory gathering that forged connections, spread news, and incubated friendships. Communal dining table was arguably the most powerful social tool a boarding house possessed, transforming a collection of strangers into something resembling a temporary, often boisterous family. Meals were typically served at set times, usually 3 times a day: breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Punctuality was often expected, as the landlady and her staff had a schedule to keep. Imagine the scene: the clatter of plates, the murmur of voices, the tantalizing aroma of a roast or a hearty stew. Boarders would take their assigned seats, or, in more relaxed houses, find an open spot. For many, this was the only guaranteed social interaction of their day, a chance to shed the anonymity of the city and connect with others. The dining room table became a stage for all manner of social interactions. Here, new boarders were introduced, their backgrounds discreetly probed. Here, daily events were dissected, the latest news from the factory, the gossip from the office, the triumphs and tribulations of city life. Arguments might flare up over politics or sports, only to be smoothed over by the landlady's firm but gentle intervention. Friendships often blossomed over shared gravy boats and passed bread baskets. Quiet nod might turn into a shared joke, then an evening spent in the parlor, and perhaps, eventually, a lifelong bond. According to social historians studying urban life, these communal meals were critical in helping new arrivals to cities adapt and find their footing, providing a ready-made social circle when other avenues might be scarce. Beyond the dining room, the parlor was the next most vital social hub. This was the designated space for relaxation, quiet, conversation, and approved entertainment. Typically furnished with a piano, a comfortable sofa, and several armchairs, it was where boarders could unwind after a long day. You might find a group of young men playing a game of checkers, while a young woman quietly read a novel by the lamplight. On another evening, Someone might play a tune on the piano, prompting a sing-along or an impromptu dance. For those seeking romance, the parlor was the primary stage. Courtship in a boarding house was a highly supervised affair. Young men would call on young women in the parlor, always under the watchful eye of the landlady or another chaperone. This public display of affection, or rather polite interaction, was designed to protect the reputation of the young woman and the respectability of the house. Polite conversation, an exchange of smiles, a shared laugh over a popular magazine, these were the subtle steps of courtship in an era far removed from modern dating apps. Parlor acted as a filter, allowing for respectful interactions while deterring anything deemed inappropriate. Think of Clara, a teacher boarding in New York City in the 1900s. After a long day of instructing rambunctious school children, she looked forward to dinner. She would sit beside Margaret, a quiet librarian, and across from Mr. Davies, a charming but slightly pompous accountant. Over plates of boiled beef and potatoes, they would discuss everything from the latest Broadway show to the ongoing women's suffrage movement. Later in the parlor, Clara might join a game of whist, or simply listen as Mr. Davies, a self-proclaimed intellectual, read aloud from the evening newspaper, interjecting his opinions. She found herself enjoying his company, and he, in turn, often found reasons to linger near her chair. Their relationship, which eventually led to a proposal, began with these small, consistent interactions in the communal spaces of their boarding house. The very architecture of the boarding house, with its shared dining rooms and parlors, forced interaction. There was little opportunity for complete solitude, which could be a blessing or a curse, depending on one's temperament. However, for the majority of single individuals seeking to establish themselves in a new city, this enforced communal living was a net positive. It provided a built-in social network, a source of information, advice, and emotional support. It helped them develop social skills, learn etiquette, and navigate the unspoken rules of urban society. In a world where privacy was scarce, connection was abundant, and the shared spaces of the boarding house cultivated a vibrant, if sometimes crowded, social ecosystem where daily life and budding relationships unfolded side by side. Number 7. The unwritten rules of the house. While boarding houses provided vital social hubs, they were far from free-for-alls. In fact, they operated under a strict, often unwritten code of conduct, largely enforced by the landlady, but also by the collective scrutiny of the other boarders. These rules dictated everything from mealtime etiquette to courtship rituals, and adhering to them was crucial for maintaining one's reputation and ensuring a harmonious, respectable living environment. To break these rules was to risk not just eviction, but social ostracization. One of the most paramount rules, especially concerning young women, involved visitors. Unchaperoned visits from men were generally forbidden, or at least highly discouraged. If a gentleman caller wished to visit a female boarder, he would typically announce himself to the landlady, who would then usher him into the parlor. The interaction would take place there in the public eye, often with the landlady herself or another boarder present. This system, while seemingly restrictive by modern standards, was designed to protect the reputation of the young woman. A woman's respectability was her most valuable asset, and any hint of impropriety could ruin her chances for marriage or even employment. A boarding house that allowed loose behavior would quickly lose its respectable clientele. Curfews were another common and strictly enforced rule, particularly for younger boarders. Returning too late, especially for young women, could lead to a stern lecture from the landlady or even a demand to leave. This was about maintaining order and ensuring the safety and reputation of all residents. Imagine a young clerk, John, who liked to spend evenings at the music hall. If he consistently arrived back after the agreed-upon hour, the landlady, Mrs. O'Malley, might simply lock the door forcing him to find alternative lodging for the night, a clear message that his behavior was not welcome. Beyond formal rules, there was an overarching expectation of respectable behavior. Loud noise, drunkenness, arguments, or any form of disruptive conduct would not be tolerated. Boarders were expected to be polite, considerate of others, and to contribute to a generally pleasant atmosphere. This was a communal living space, and everyone's comfort depended on everyone else's adherence to these unwritten social contracts. Courtship, as mentioned before, was largely confined to the parlor. It was a formal dance of polite conversation, shared interests, and subtle gestures. A young man might bring flowers, offer to read poetry, or simply engage in witty banter. The landlady, ever vigilant, acted as an unofficial chaperone. While this might seem stifling, it also provided a safe, structured environment for young people to get to know each other without the pressures of a more private setting. It encouraged intellectual and conversational connections over purely physical ones. Pressure to marry was often palpable in these houses, especially for women, and the parlor was the primary arena for this life-altering pursuit. However, despite the rules and constant surveillance, gossip was an ever-present force. In a house full of people living in close quarters, every glance, every whispered conversation, every late return was noticed and dissected. Reputations could be made or broken over a single misunderstood interaction. If a young woman received too many male callers, or if a young man seemed too eager in his attentions, it would quickly become the subject of hushed conversations in the dining room. This constant peer review served as an additional layer of social control, reinforcing conformity to the norms of the time. And what happened when the rules were broken? Scandals, though usually quiet, could erupt. A young woman might elope, causing a stir of shock and disapproval. A boarder might be discovered to have a secret gambling habit. There were also quiet tragedies. A young woman who found herself in trouble and had to leave suddenly, or a boarder who fell ill and had no family to care for them. These incidents, while not openly discussed, served as cautionary tales, reinforcing the importance of adherence to the house's code. For instance, in the late 19th century, instances of unwed pregnancies were hushed up, and young women would often disappear from boarding houses to live with relatives in another town, or, in extreme cases, to enter homes for unwed mothers. The shame was immense, and the boarding house, designed to protect reputations, could also be a place where such a reputation was irrevocably lost. The unwritten rules of the boarding house, though restrictive by modern standards, were a necessary part of their function. They allowed these establishments to serve as respectable safe havens for single individuals in a rapidly changing world. They protected reputations, maintained order, and provided a structured environment where social connections, including potential marriages, could flourish under careful supervision. These rules shaped the daily lives of millions, guiding their interactions and providing a framework for navigating the complexities of single life in a bustling historical city. Number 6. A different kind of gathering. The salon. While boarding houses provided essential practical and social support for a broad spectrum of historical singles, another kind of social hub existed, catering to a different crowd and serving a more refined purpose: the salon. Forget shared dining tables and strict curfews. Salons were about intellectual discourse, artistic expression, and the krakidig exchange of ideas, often in the elegant private homes of wealthy or influential hosts. They were less about basic needs and more about elevated conversation. The concept of the salon originated in 17th century France, specifically Paris, evolving from informal gatherings of polite society into highly structured and influential intellectual and literary circles. These gatherings continued to thrive throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, eventually spreading their influence across Europe and even to America. The word salon itself comes from the French word for drawing room, emphasizing their setting in private residences rather than public venues. The primary distinction between a boarding house and a salon is purpose. A boarding house addressed the fundamental need for lodging and sustenance for single individuals, with social interaction arising organically from proximity and shared meals. A salon, on the other hand, was intentionally designed as a forum for intellectual and artistic exchange. It was not about where you slept or ate, but what you discussed, what ideas you presented, and who you met for the specific purpose of engaging with culture and thought. Historian Dina Goodman, in her study of French salons, emphasizes that these were deliberate spaces for the production and dissemination of knowledge, where wit and conversation were prized. Who attended these salons? Typically, they were the elite: philosophers, writers, artists, politicians, scientists, musicians, and wealthy patrons who supported them. While not exclusively for singles, many attendees were unmarried or found their primary social and intellectual life outside of traditional family structures. A young, ambitious writer might find a patron at a salon. A budding philosopher might test new ideas against the sharp minds gathered there. An artist might debut a new painting, gauging the reactions of critics and admirers. Unlike the often democratic chaos of a boarding house, salons were exclusive. Attendance was usually by invitation only, and the guest list was meticulously curated by the host. The goal was to bring together a diverse yet complementary group of minds, ensuring lively and stimulating conversation. The host, often a woman known as a salonier, played a crucial role in setting the tone, guiding the discussion, and encouraging participation from all her guests. Imagine stepping into a Parisian salon in the late 1700s. The room would be dimly lit by candles, the air thick with perfume and the scent of fine wine. Guests, elegantly dressed, would be clustered in small groups, their voices a low hum of debate and laughter. A poet might be reciting his latest verses in one corner, while a philosopher passionately argued a point about human rights in another. There might be a harpsichord playing soft music, or a game of chess being played with intense concentration. The focus was always on conversation, witty, intelligent, challenging, and insightful. In contrast to the pragmatic nature of boarding houses, salons were about the elevation of the mind and spirit. They were places where ideas were born, debated, and refined. They served as informal universities, artistic academies, and political forums, all rolled into one. For historical singles who were intellectuals, artists, or socialites, salons offered a vital space for professional networking, creative inspiration, and profound personal connection beyond the immediate needs of daily life. They were the drawing rooms of the thinking world, where the currency was not rent but wit, and the only rule was intellectual engagement. Number 5. The salonier, architect of intellect. If the salon was a carefully cultivated garden of ideas, then the salonier was its master gardener, painstakingly selecting each bloom and ensuring the perfect conditions for growth. These women, often powerful and intelligent in their own right, were the architects of these intellectual gatherings, shaping not just the guest list, but the very atmosphere and direction of discourse. In societies where women often had limited public roles, the salon offered a unique platform for them to exert influence, foster talent, and even subtly shape public opinion. Who were these extraordinary women? Their names echo through history, each leaving her unique mark on the cultural and intellectual landscape. Think of Madame de Rambouillet, credited with establishing one of the first and most influential literary salons in 17th century Paris, setting the standard for wit and refinement. Or Madame de Staël in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, whose salon became a hub for political exiles and liberal thinkers, challenging Napoleon's authoritarian rule with the power of ideas. Later, in the 20th century, figures like Gertrude Stein in Paris and Mabel Dodge Lujan in Taos, New Mexico, hosted salons that nurtured avant-garde artists and writers, becoming central to modernist movements. Their skills were formidable and diverse. A successful salonière possessed a sharp intellect, often educated beyond the norm for women of her time. She had impeccable social magnetism, an ability to draw diverse and brilliant people to her home. Crucially, she was a master conversationalist herself, capable of steering discussions, posing in sharp questions, and mediating debates with grace and authority. But her greatest skill was curation, knowing exactly which personalities and intellectual interests would spark the most engaging and fruitful conversations. She understood that a good salon was not just a collection of brilliant minds, but a synergy of them. Literary scholar Caroline Weber, in her analysis of 18th century French culture, highlights the salonière's role as a cultural impresario, selecting themes, inviting guests, and facilitating interactions. The influence of these women was immense. They could launch careers, offering a platform for unknown writers or artists to gain recognition and patronage. They fostered artistic and literary movements, providing a space for new ideas to be developed and disseminated before they entered the mainstream. They could even subtly shape public opinion as political debates and social commentary flowed freely within their walls. For many salonières, the salon was a way to exercise intellectual power and agency in a patriarchal society that largely excluded women from formal public life. It was a space where intellect, rather than gender or social status, was the primary currency. Consider the dynamic in Gertrude Stein's Parisian apartment at 27 Rue de Fleurus in the early 20th century. Here, on a Saturday evening, you might find a young Ernest Hemingway earnestly discussing his latest short story, while Pablo Picasso quietly sketched in a corner and F. Scott Fitzgerald pondered the meaning of the jazz age. Stein, a large, imposing woman, would preside over the scene, offering cryptic but insightful commentary, challenging her guests, and cultivating a bohemian, intellectually charged atmosphere. She wasn't just a host, she was a muse, a critic, and a guiding force, helping to shape the very definition of modern art and literature. Her collection of art, much of it purchased directly from struggling artists like Picasso, was itself a testament to her keen eye and patronage, making her salon a living museum of emerging genius. Conversations in these salons were legendary. They were often witty, sometimes scandalous, always engaging. Ideas flowed freely, challenging conventions and sparking new lines of thought. These gatherings provided a vital intellectual oxygen for their attendees, a place where they could truly stretch their minds and engage with peers who understood and appreciated their pursuits. The salonière, with her unique blend of social grace and intellectual rigor, was the driving force behind it all, proving that the most profound social hubs are often born not from necessity, but from a deliberate desire to connect minds and elevate discourse. She was the unsung power behind countless intellectual and artistic revolutions, shaping the minds and careers of countless individuals. Number 4. Who's in the room? Artists, rebels, and thinkers. If the salonière was the curator, then the guests were the invaluable collection, each piece contributing to the vibrant tapestry of intellectual life. Guest list of a successful salon was a carefully chosen blend of established figures and rising talents, seasoned philosophers and rebellious young artists, all united by a shared passion for ideas, art, and conversation. For historical singles, especially those in creative or intellectual pursuits, gaining entry to a prominent salon could be a game changer, offering unparalleled opportunities for networking, intellectual stimulation, and even patronage. The sheer diversity of attendees was a hallmark of the most dynamic salons. You might find a renowned poet debating with a radical political thinker, while a famous composer quietly listened in perhaps gathering inspiration for his next symphony. Cutting-edge scientist might share discoveries with a fascinated novelist, bridging disciplines and sparking intercity thought. Politicians sought out these spaces to gauge public opinion and test their ideas against the sharpest minds. For example, during the Enlightenment in France, salons hosted figures like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Denis Diderot, alongside aristocrats and foreign dignitaries, creating a melting pot of revolutionary thought. The benefits for attendees were immense and multifaceted. Foremost was the intellectual stimulation. Imagine being able to regularly engage in deep, challenging conversations with the leading minds of your generation. This was an informal education far beyond what any university could offer, providing insights, feedback, and new perspectives that could shape one's own work. For an artist, it meant seeing the latest works of their peers, hearing critiques, and perhaps even finding new techniques or inspirations. For a writer, it meant testing out new narrative ideas or discussing literary trends. Networking was another crucial advantage. These salons were arguably the most effective professional networking events of their time. A young, unknown writer might meet an influential publisher. A struggling artist might find a wealthy patron willing to commission a portrait or buy a landscape. A philosopher might meet a diplomat who could open doors to international academic circles. These connections, often forged over shared laughter and intellectual sparring, could be invaluable for career advancement and personal growth. Historian Antoine Lilti, in his work on the culture of Parisian salons, highlights how these gatherings fostered not just intellectual exchange, but also significant social and professional advancement for their participants. Think of a young painter, Auguste, arriving in Paris in the 1870s with little money but immense talent. He manages to secure an invitation to a modest but well-regarded salon. There, he doesn't just show his portfolio, he engages in passionate discussions about light and shadow, about the revolutionary ideas of the Impressionists. He meets an art critic who admires his perspective, and crucially, an aristocratic patron who agrees to visit his studio and eventually commissions a painting. Without the salon, Auguste might have toiled in obscurity for years, but through these carefully carpeted gatherings, his talent found its audience and support. The atmosphere of a successful salon was electric. It was a place of lively debate, sparkling wit, and often delicious gossip. There was an unspoken competition to be the most eloquent, the most hysterical, or the funniest. While formal, there was also a pervasive sense of intellectual freedom, a space where controversial ideas could be aired and debated without fear of immediate public reprisal. This buzz was contagious, creating a reputation that drew more brilliant minds and perpetuated the salon's influence. It was a place where ideas literally spread, where books were discussed before publication, and artistic movements were informally codified. Sometimes the gatherings could even be scandalous, particularly if they ventured into political dissent or radical artistic expression. But this added to their allure, making them destinations for those who craved stimulation beyond polite society. For historical singles, often seeking to make their mark on the world without the traditional anchors of family or established careers, the salon offered a powerful platform. It was a place to belong to an intellectual lineage, to be recognized for one's mind, and to contribute to the ongoing conversation of culture and ideas shaping the future of art, literature, and thought one brilliant evening at a time. Number 3. Making connections, romance, business, and friendship. Whether in the bustling communal spaces of a boarding house or the refined intellectual circles of a salon, these historical hubs were fundamentally about one thing: making connections. For singles navigating a world less equipped for solitary living, These spaces provided essential avenues for forming relationships that were vital for survival, success, and personal fulfillment. These connections could manifest as lifelong friendships, crucial business partnerships, or even the romantic pairing that led to marriage. In boarding houses, the most immediate and common connection forged was often platonic friendship. Living in such close quarters, sharing meals, and experiencing the daily rhythm of the house naturally led to bonds. Young women working in the same department store might become confidants, sharing dreams and struggles over evening tea. Young men, perhaps struggling with the loneliness of a new city, might find camaraderie with a fellow boarder, going to lectures or sporting events together. These friendships were critical support systems, providing emotional anchors in a transient and often challenging urban environment. As historian Robert H. Weed notes in The Search for Order, 1877–1920, the lack of traditional family networks for urban migrants meant that new forms of association, like those found in boarding houses, became crucial for social stability. And of course, there was romance. Boarding houses were in many ways accidental matchmakers. With young, unattached men and women living under the same roof, opportunities for courtship abounded. Parlor, as discussed, was the primary stage for these interactions. A young clerk might be smitten by the seamstress across the dining table. A teacher might find herself charmed by the wit of a young engineer. Many marriages began with these casual, supervised interactions within the boarding house walls. The shared living situation allowed for a gradual, natural development of affection, far removed from the more formal introductions arranged by family or through social calls. These relationships were often practical too. Two incomes, or a shared household, offered greater financial stability in an age before extensive social safety nets. Beyond romance, boarding houses also facilitated crucial business and professional connections. Printer's apprentice might meet a shop owner looking for skilled labor. A struggling artist might find a quiet patron among the house's residents. Information about job openings, new business ventures, or advantageous opportunities could circulate rapidly through the dining room chatter. This informal networking was particularly valuable for new arrivals to the city, providing them with essential intelligence and potential leads they might not have found otherwise. Salons, while less focused on day-to-day practicalities, were equally vital for specific types of connections. For intellectuals, artists, and professionals, salons were premier networking events. A promising writer might meet an influential literary critic who could champion their work. A budding philosopher could find a mentor in an established academic. An artist could secure patronage from a wealthy connoisseur. These connections were often career-defining, providing opportunities that simply did not exist in the more formal, rigid structures of society. The very purpose of a salon was to foster collaboration, debate, and the exchange of ideas that could lead to groundbreaking work. Consider a young aspiring playwright in 1920s Paris attending Gertrude Stein's salon. He might engage in a passionate discussion about narrative structure with James Joyce, or receive blunt but invaluable advice from Ernest Hemingway. He might even meet a theater producer or a wealthy American expatriate interested in funding new artistic ventures. These encounters, born from the shared intellectual space of the salon, could transform a hopeful amateur into a recognized professional, giving him the connections and confidence to pursue his dreams. Ultimately, both boarding houses and salons, despite their differences in clientele and purpose, served as critical social hubs for historical singles. They mitigated loneliness, provided practical support, and most importantly, created vibrant ecosystems where individuals could connect, share, and grow. Whether it was the search for a spouse, a new job, or simply a kindred spirit, these unique institutions allowed countless historical singles to build fulfilling lives and contribute to the rich tapestry of society, proving that even without modern technologies, humans have always found ways to connect and thrive. Number 2, the loneliness factor, when social hubs weren't enough. While boarding houses and salons offered vital social networks for many historical singles, it is crucial to remember that they were not universally beneficial. For some, these highly structured and communal environments could exacerbate feelings of loneliness, social anxiety, or even lead to exploitation. Not everyone thrived in a constant state of shared existence, and the very benefits that drew some could become burdens for others. These hubs, designed to alleviate isolation, sometimes highlighted it for those who struggled to fit in. One significant challenge was simply the pressure to conform. Boarding houses with their strict rules and constant scrutiny could be stifling for individuals who valued privacy or marched to the beat of their own drum. A quiet, introverted person might find the incessant chatter of the dining room overwhelming, or the expectation of engaging in parlor games exhausting. For those with social anxieties, the constant performance of polite interaction could be a source of immense stress, making them feel more isolated rather than less. Imagine a shy young woman, new to the city, feeling the weight of curious glances at dinner, unable to join the lively banter, and retreating to her small room, feeling more alone than ever. Economic vulnerability was another dark undercurrent. While boarding houses were affordable, losing a job meant losing a home, often with little notice. There was no social safety net in place for the unemployed or the ill. A single person, especially a woman, without family nearby could find themselves in a desperate situation if their income ceased. Records from urban charities and almshouses from the 19th and early 20th centuries often show individuals who had fallen on hard times after losing their place in a boarding house. Temporary nature of their housing meant that security was always tenuous. Discrimination also played a significant, though often unspoken, role. Access to respectable boarding houses, particularly those with a good reputation, was often limited by race, class, and sometimes even religion. African Americans, recent immigrants, or those from lower socioeconomic classes often found themselves relegated to less desirable, more crowded, and sometimes dangerous accommodation. These places might lack the social benefits and sense of community found in more affluent boarding houses, leaving these individuals even more marginalized. For example, historian Joanne J. Meyerowitz in Women Adrift, Independent Wage Earners in Chicago 1880–1930, details how Black women arriving in Chicago faced significant barriers to finding safe, respectable housing, or faced decufft prior. The transient nature of boarding house life meant constant goodbyes. People moved in and out frequently, following jobs, changing circumstances, or seeking better opportunities. Just as friendships were forming, a beloved boarder might announce their departure. This constant flux could lead to emotional fatigue, making it harder for some to invest deeply in new relationships, fostering a sense of perpetual impermanence. For those prone to melancholy, this cycle of hellos and goodbyes could reinforce a feeling of rootlessness. Even in the more intellectual realm of salons, loneliness could persist. While these gatherings were about ideas and connection, they were often highly competitive spaces. For an artist whose work wasn't praised, or a writer whose ideas were dismissed, the salon could feel like a public humiliation rather than an inspiring forum. Pressure to be witty, profound, or charming could be immense, leaving those who struggled to meet these intellectual demands feeling inadequate and isolated, even amidst a crowd of brilliant minds. An anecdote from the life of a minor poet who frequented the Parisian salon in the 1890s mentions him feeling dwarfed by the intellect of the room, despite being surrounded by his peers. Stories of individuals who struggled are less often recorded in glowing histories, but appear in personal letters and social reform documents. A young clerk might write home expressing profound loneliness despite living in a house full of people, simply because he felt he couldn't connect with anyone. A woman might describe her attempts to fit in as exhausting, preferring the quiet solitude of her room to the forced gaiety of the parlor. These narratives remind us that while collective living offered solutions, it also presented unique challenges for the diverse individuals who sought a place in the urban landscape. The social hubs were a double-edged sword, providing connection for many, but highlighting the inherent loneliness of being single for others. Number 1. Fading away. The end of an era. Like all social institutions, boarding houses and salons, once indispensable hubs for historical singles, eventually began to decline, slowly fading from the urban landscape. Their demise wasn't sudden, but a gradual process, driven by profound shifts in society, architecture, economy, and culture that made their unique functions less necessary or desirable. By the mid-20th century, these once vibrant centers of communal life were largely relegated to memory, replaced by new ways of living and socializing. One of the most significant architectural and economic changes was the rise of the modern apartment building. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as urban populations continued to swell, developers began constructing multi-unit dwellings designed for independent living. These apartments, increasingly equipped with their own private kitchens and bathrooms, offered something revolutionary: privacy and autonomy. No longer did a single person need to share a dining room or a parlor or rely on a landlady for meals. They could cook for themselves, entertain guests in their own private living room, and come and go without the constant oversight of a house manager or the watchful eyes of fellow boarders. This shift towards self-contained units fundamentally undermined the room and board model that was the foundation of boarding houses. Historian Dolores Hayden, in Building Suburbia, points to the rise of apartment living as a key factor in the decline of more communal forms of housing. Simultaneously, the trend towards suburbanization gained momentum. As cities grew denser, the ideal of the single-family home with a yard became increasingly appealing, particularly for married couples and families. The emphasis shifted from communal urban living to the nuclear family unit in a private dwelling. While suburbs were not an option for all singles, the cultural ideal they represented, a home separate from the hustle and bustle, dedicated to the immediate family, influenced broader societal perceptions of ideal living arrangements. Changing social norms and entertainment habits also played a crucial role. Parlor culture of the 19th century, where social life revolved around home visits, card games, and piano recitals, began to wane. New forms of public entertainment emerged and soared in popularity. Movie theaters, dance halls, restaurants, speakeasies, and later bars and nightclubs. Singles no longer needed to rely solely on their living arrangements to meet people or find entertainment. They could step out, choose their social scene, and interact with a wider, more diverse pool of individuals. The need for a tightly controlled, semi-private social space like a boarding house parlor diminished significantly. Furthermore, economic shifts meant that fewer single women needed to rely on boarding houses for respectable lodging. As women gained more professional opportunities and greater economic independence, they could afford their own apartments or shared residences with friends without the need for a landlady's supervision. The very demographic that had fueled the boarding house boom, young single women migrating for work, found more diversified and private housing options. Salons, too, underwent a transformation. While intellectual gatherings never entirely disappeared, the formal, highly structured salon of the 18th and 19th centuries became less prevalent. The rise of universities, public lectures, literary societies, and organized arts institutions provided more formal avenues for intellectual and artistic exchange. Publishing became more widespread, allowing ideas to disseminate through books and magazines rather than relying solely on oral discussion. While informal gatherings of artists and intellectuals continued, the grand, influential salon as a central cultural force largely faded, replaced by more specialized and institutionalized forms of intellectual engagement. Gertrude Stein's salon was one of the last major figures in this tradition, and even hers became more of a historical curiosity by the mid-20th century. The legacy of boarding houses and salons, however, remains profound. They were critical social experiments, adapting to the unique needs of historical singles during periods of rapid urbanization and social change. They shaped urban life, fostering communities where none existed, and providing essential support, connections, and even opportunities for romance and career advancement. While their physical structures may have largely disappeared or been repurposed, their ghost lingers in the stories of countless individuals who found a home, a friend, or a profound idea within their walls, silently paving the way for the social structures that exist today.